The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air as Lisa Daniels wiped down the counter of Joe's Diner, a small but cozy restaurant in the heart of town. It was just another ordinary evening shift, at least, that's what she thought. Lisa had worked at the diner for 3 years, and she had seen all kinds of customers walk through the doors. Some were regulars, some were travelers passing through, and some were struggling souls looking for a moment of warmth. That's when she noticed him, a frail-looking man sitting quietly in the corner booth. His clothes were tattered, his hands were rough and weathered, and his eyes held the weight of 1,000 untold stories. He was clearly homeless, and by the way he hesitated before glancing at the menu, Lisa could tell he had no money to pay for a meal. Lisa had a big heart, and she didn't think twice. She walked over with a warm smile. "What can I get for you today?" The man looked up, surprised that she was even talking to him. "Oh, just some water, please." Lisa's heart ached. He was too proud to ask for help. She nodded and walked back to the kitchen. But instead of just water, she placed an order for the diner's special, a hot meal of roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and fresh bread. She paid for it herself, knowing he wouldn't accept charity. When she returned, she set the plate in front of him. "It's on the house," she said with a kind smile. Tears welled up in his eyes as he whispered, "Thank you." Lisa had no idea that this simple act of kindness would change her life forever. The man sat in stunned silence, staring at the warm meal in front of him. For a moment, he didn't move, almost as if he couldn't believe it was real. Then, slowly, he picked up his fork, his hands trembling as he took the first bite. Lisa watched from behind the counter, pretending to wipe a glass, but in truth, she was observing him. Something about him seemed different from the usual homeless people who wandered into the diner. He wasn't just down on his luck, he carried himself with a certain dignity, a quiet strength buried beneath his worn-out exterior. After a few moments, Lisa walked over and refilled his water. "What's your name?" she asked gently that he hesitated before answering. "James," he finally said. "Well, James, I hope you enjoy the meal." He nodded, chewing slowly, as if savoring every bite. Then, after a deep breath, he looked up at her. "You didn't have to do this." Lisa smiled. "I wanted to." For the first time that night, James let out a small chuckle. "Not many people do." Lisa leaned against the booth. "You don't seem like you've always been in this situation." James exhaled, his eyes darkening. "I haven't." He took another sip of water and stared out the window. "I used to serve. U.S. Army." Lisa's eyes widened. "A veteran?" She had a deep respect for those who served, but it pained her to see how so many were left to struggle. Before she could ask more, James sighed. "That was a long time ago. Now, I'm just another forgotten soldier." Lisa had no idea that by the next day, he would be anything but forgotten. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that James was more than just another struggling veteran. His words lingered in her mind, just another forgotten soldier. Something about the way he said it felt heavy, almost like he had accepted his fate. As James finished his meal, Lisa walked back over. "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" she asked carefully. James chuckled dryly. "Wherever I can find a bench that isn't too cold." Lisa frowned. She wanted to do more, but she knew pushing him might make him uncomfortable. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a few dollars, her tip money from earlier in the day. "Here. It's not much, but maybe it'll help." James looked at the money, then back at Lisa. His expression softened. "You really don't have to do this." "I know," Lisa said with a smile. "But I want to." James hesitated before finally taking the money. "You're one of the good ones," he murmured. Lisa was about to respond when the diner's door swung open, and a group of late-night customers walked in. "Duty called." She gave James one last nod before heading back to work. As she took orders and poured coffee, she occasionally glanced at James, watching as he slowly finished his meal. When he was done, he carefully wiped his hands, folded the napkin neatly, and stood up. Before leaving, he turned back one last time and gave Lisa a small, grateful smile. Then, just like that, he was gone. Lisa had no way of knowing that this was not the last time she'd see James. In fact, by tomorrow, the entire world would know his name. The next morning, Lisa arrived at Joe's diner just as the sun began to rise. The familiar smell of coffee and fresh pancakes filled the air as she tied her apron and prepared for another day. But something felt different. As she wiped down the counter, her mind kept drifting back to James. Where had he gone? Did he find a safe place to sleep? She hoped so. A part of her wished she had done more, but she reminded herself that even small acts of kindness could make a difference. The morning rush came and went, and Lisa was just about to take a break when she heard it, the deep rumble of engines outside. Curious, she walked to the front window, and her breath caught in her throat. A line of military vehicles had pulled up in front of the diner. The sight was almost surreal. Large, black SUVs with tinted windows, and two camouflage Humvees parked on the street. Soldiers in uniform stepped out, their boots hitting the pavement in unison. The diner went silent. Customers turned their heads, whispering among themselves. Lisa's heart pounded. What was going on? The front door swung open, and a tall man in full military dress stepped inside. His uniform was crisp, and his posture radiated authority. His eyes scanned the diner before landing directly on Lisa. He walked straight toward her. "Are you Lisa Daniels?" Lisa swallowed hard. "Yes, that's me." The man extended a hand. "I'm Colonel Matthew Reynolds, U.S. Army. I believe you met someone very important last night." Lisa's mind raced. "James," she could barely get the words out. "You mean James?" Colonel Reynolds nodded. "Yes. And because of what you did for him, everything is about to change." Lisa felt her stomach twist as Colonel Reynolds looked at her with an unreadable expression. The entire diner was silent, eyes fixed on the military officer standing in front of her. She swallowed hard. "James, is he okay?" The colonel gave a small nod. "He's safe. But there's something you need to know about him." Lisa frowned. "Who is he?" Colonel Reynolds took a deep breath before speaking. "James isn't just a veteran. He's a war hero. A highly decorated soldier who served in classified missions overseas." He paused for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. 3 years ago, he went missing." Lisa's breath hitched. "Missing? You mean, the military lost him?" The colonel nodded grimly. "We thought he was dead. He was part of an operation that went south. When we couldn't find his body, we assumed the worst." His jaw tightened. "But apparently, he's been out here, struggling to survive. And we had no idea." Lisa's head spun. She had served a simple meal to a national hero, a man the military had given up on. "Why didn't he come back?" she asked softly. Colonel Reynolds sighed. "We don't know. Maybe guilt, maybe trauma. Soldiers who go through what he did, they don't always come home the same." Lisa's heart ached. James had been sitting in her diner, completely alone, believing he was forgotten. And yet, he was someone the entire country should have been honoring. Colonel Reynolds straightened. "Because of you, we found him. Now, we need your help to bring him back." Lisa had no idea what that meant. But she knew one thing for certain, James's story was far from over. Lisa's mind raced as she processed Colonel Reynolds' words. James wasn't just another struggling veteran, he was a hero who had vanished. And now, the military wanted him back. She took a shaky breath. "How can I help?" Reynolds studied her for a moment. "You're the last person to see him. Do you have any idea where he might have gone?" Lisa frowned, thinking back to their conversation. "He said he didn't have a place to stay. He usually sleeps wherever he can find a bench." The colonel turned to one of his officers. "Send a team to check shelters, parks, and abandoned buildings." "He couldn't have gone far." Lisa bit her lip. "Wait. I think I might know where he is." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Go on." She glanced out the diner window, remembering a place James had briefly mentioned the night before. "There's an old bridge on the edge of town. Some of the homeless go there when the shelters are full. He might be there. Without hesitation, the colonel motioned to his men. Let's move. Lisa hesitated before speaking up. I'm coming with you. Reynolds looked uncertain. It could be dangerous. Lisa folded her arms. I don't care. He trusts me. If you show up in full military gear, he might run. The colonel considered this for a moment, then nodded. All right. But stay close. Within minutes, Lisa found herself riding in the back of a military SUV, heading toward the bridge. Her heart pounded in her chest. Would James still be there? And if he was, would he even want to be found? The SUV rumbled down the deserted road, its headlights cutting through the early morning mist. Lisa sat between two uniformed officers, her heart pounding with anticipation. Would James even want to be found? Would he recognize her, or would he see her as just another person trying to drag him back to a past he wanted to forget? As they neared the old bridge on the outskirts of town, Lisa saw the telltale signs of makeshift shelters, tattered blankets, shopping carts filled with belongings, and the faint glow of small fires keeping the cold at bay. A few people stirred as the military vehicles came to a stop, their faces filled with both curiosity and caution. Lisa stepped out first, scanning the area. She walked carefully through the scattered belongings, her eyes darting from one figure to another. Then, she saw him. James was sitting on the ground, his back against the cold concrete wall of the bridge, wrapped in a worn-out military coat. He wasn't asleep, but he wasn't fully alert either. His eyes flickered open, and when he saw Lisa, he tensed. You found me, he murmured. Lisa took a cautious step forward. I was worried about you. James exhaled, shaking his head. You shouldn't be here. Before she could respond, the sound of boots crunching on gravel signaled the arrival of Colonel Reynolds and his men. James immediately stiffened. His expression darkened as he looked past Lisa and saw the military uniforms. No, James said, his voice firm. I'm not going back. Lisa's stomach clenched. She had found him, but now, she had to convince him to trust her. James pushed himself to his feet, his tired eyes darting between Lisa and Colonel Reynolds. His body tensed, as if preparing to run. I told you, he said, his voice sharp. I'm not going back. Lisa took a deep breath, keeping her voice gentle. James, we're not here to force you into anything. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. James let out a bitter chuckle. Okay? Do I look okay to you? He gestured to his worn-out clothes, the makeshift shelter he had built under the bridge. I lost everything. My brothers in arms, my purpose, my life. His voice cracked on the last word. Colonel Reynolds stepped forward. James, you were never forgotten. The military has been searching for you for years. James clenched his jaw. And why? Because I was useful to you? Because I was a soldier who could still fight. His fists tightened at his sides. I'm not your asset anymore, Colonel. Reynolds shook his head. That's not why we're here. We're here because you deserve better than this. You served your country with honor, you shouldn't be living in the shadows. James scoffed. Honor? Tell that to the man we lost. His voice was laced with pain. Lisa felt the weight of his words. He wasn't just homeless, he was broken. Haunted by memories of war, guilt, and loss, she took another step closer. James, no one is here to drag you back. But you deserve a second chance. James looked at her, his hardened expression wavering for the first time. For the first time, it seemed like he was actually listening. James stared at Lisa, his expression unreadable. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. He had spent years running, from his past, from his pain, from the people who once called him a hero. And now, here they were, offering him a way back. But did he even want it? Colonel Reynolds took a step forward. James, I know you're hurting. I know you feel like the world forgot about you. But we didn't. He paused. There are people who care about you. People who want to help. James let out a shaky breath. Help? He shook his head. I don't need help. I need to forget. Lisa's heart ached at his words. You don't have to do this alone, James, she said softly. You helped this country. Now, let someone help you. James looked away, his jaw tight. He had been alone for so long. Surviving, but not really living. Could he trust them? Could he believe that there was still something left for him beyond the streets? Then, for the first time, Lisa saw something shift in his eyes. A flicker of hesitation. A crack in the wall he had built around himself. I don't know how to go back, he admitted quietly. Colonel Reynolds nodded. Then let us show you how. Silence stretched between them. The air was thick with unspoken emotions. Then, after what felt like an eternity, James exhaled and whispered, Okay. Lisa felt a wave of relief wash over her. He had made his choice, but none of them knew that the hardest part was still yet to come. James sat in the back of the military SUV, staring out the window as the city streets blurred past. The hum of the engine was steady, but his mind raced with uncertainty. He had spent years in the shadows, believing he had no place left in the world. Now, he was heading towards something unknown, a second chance. Lisa sat beside him, offering a reassuring presence without pushing him to talk. She had done enough, more than anyone else had in a long time. And for the first time in years, James didn't feel invisible. Colonel Reynolds sat in the front seat, speaking quietly into a radio. We have him. ETA 15 minutes. James swallowed hard. Where are you taking me? Reynolds turned slightly. To the VA hospital. They have programs to help, housing, counseling, job support. It's a fresh start. James let out a small, dry chuckle. I don't even know how to be a normal person anymore. Lisa smiled gently. You don't have to figure it out all at once. Just take it one step at a time. The SUV slowed as they pulled up to a large building with the United States Department of Veterans Affairs logo on the front. A few staff members were waiting, ready to welcome James. He hesitated before stepping out, his hands clenching at his sides. Lisa touched his arm. You got this. James looked at her, really looked at her, and nodded. Thank you, for seeing me when no one else did. Lisa smiled. You were never meant to be forgotten. As James walked toward the entrance, he wasn't just stepping into a building, he was stepping into a new life. A life where he was no longer lost. A life where he was finally found. James' story is just one of many. Thousands of veterans struggle with homelessness, trauma, and feeling forgotten after serving their country. But just like Lisa, you can make a difference. A small act of kindness, buying a meal, offering a conversation, or even just acknowledging someone's struggles, can change a life. If you believe in supporting our heroes, take action today. Support veteran charities like the Wounded Warrior Project or the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. Reach out to a veteran in your community. A simple thank you can mean the world. Share this story to spread awareness and remind others that no hero should ever be forgotten.